Welcome to Sleepy Lore. Tonight, we tell the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, a love that crossed the boundary between the living and the dead, carried only on the wings of music. Allow yourself to settle in, breathe slowly, and let the story carry you. In the oldest days of Greece, when gods still walked among mortals and the earth was young and full of wonder, there lived a young man named Orpheus. He was born, some say, to the great god Apollo himself, god of the sun, god of music, god of all things golden and bright. Others say he was the son of a Thracian king, a mortal man who loved music more than power. But all who told his story agreed on one thing. Orpheus played the lyre in a way that no human being had ever played before, and no human being has played since. His lyre had been given to him by Apollo, and it was no ordinary instrument. It was small and delicate, strung with gut and set with ivory, but the sound it made was something the world had never known. It was not simply beautiful, it was alive. When Orpheus drew his fingers across the strings, the sound did not merely fill a room, it filled the air, it filled the trees. It filled the slow-moving rivers and the gray stone mountains and the distant sea. When Orpheus played, the rivers paused in their flowing, not because they were startled, not because they were afraid. They paused, gently and willingly, the way a person pauses when they hear something so beautiful that the body forgets, for a moment, what it was doing. The trees would bend toward him as he passed through the forest, leaning slightly, as though trying to hear better. Old trees, trees that had stood for hundreds of years and had seen everything and been moved by nothing. They leaned. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but they leaned. Their great roots held them to the earth, but the upper branches tilted toward the sound the way a sleeper tilts toward warmth without waking. Stones would roll, almost imperceptibly, toward the sound of his music. Not boulders, not cliffs. Small stones, river stones, the kind that sit in the dirt along a path and have sat there so long they seem almost to belong to it. Those stones would shift slightly, rolling an inch or two in the direction of the music, as though they too wanted to be closer. Even the wind, that restless, wandering thing that belongs to no one and goes wherever it wishes, even the wind would slow when Orpheus played, hovering in the air as though it too wanted to listen. The leaves would stop their rustling, the tall grass would go still, and for a moment, the world would hold its breath. People would stop on the road when they heard him coming. They would set down whatever they were carrying, a jar of water, a bundle of wood, a child on their hip, and they would stand in the road and listen, and afterward they would find it difficult to say exactly what they had heard, or how long they had been standing there, or why their eyes were wet. He walked through the world like this, quietly, gently, carrying his lyre under one arm, and playing whenever the mood came upon him, which was often, because the music was never far from his heart. And so Orpheus lived, content in his wandering, in his music, in the beauty of the world around him, until he met Eurydice. She was a nymph, a daughter of the wild places, of meadows and streams and the soft earth beneath the trees. Her name meant, in the old language, she whose justice extends widely. A grand, serious name for someone whose presence was, by all accounts, gentle and light, like the first warm morning of spring after a long winter. They met, as the oldest stories tell it, in a meadow. Orpheus was passing through, as he often did, his lyre resting against his shoulder. Eurydice was there with the other nymphs, moving through the tall grass, laughing at something. The stories don't say what. Perhaps it doesn't matter. Perhaps what matters is only that she turned at the sound of his footsteps, and he stopped when he saw her, and in that moment, something shifted. He played for her that day. He sat down in the grass and played, and the meadow grew very quiet around him, and Eurydice stood very still and listened. When he was finished, she sat beside him, and they talked until the light changed and the shadows grew long across the grass, and neither of them noticed the time passing, which is always the surest sign of something important. They were married not long after. The wedding was a joyful thing. Hymenaeus, the god of marriage himself, came to bless the ceremony, which was considered a great honor, a sign that the gods themselves approved of the union. He carried his torch, as he always did, but that day, the stories say, his torch did not burn bright and clean as it usually did. It smoked, it flickered, it gave off a strange, stinging smell that made the guests' eyes water. No one spoke of this at the time. It seemed rude to mention it, and the day was so full of happiness, and the music Orpheus played was so beautiful, that the small wrongness of the torch was easily forgotten. But the old storytellers remembered it. They always remembered the signs. It happened not long after the wedding. How long? The stories disagree. Some say days, some say weeks, some say it was on the very afternoon of the wedding itself, which seems almost too cruel, but the old myths were not always kind. Eurydice was walking in a meadow with her companions. The afternoon was warm and golden, the kind of afternoon that makes everything feel peaceful and permanent, as though nothing could ever change. The grass was soft under her feet. The air smelled of flowers. The other nymphs were laughing somewhere nearby. She did not see the snake. It was resting in the long grass, as snakes do on warm afternoons, still and silent and perfectly invisible against the earth. She stepped near it, perhaps too near it, and it struck, sudden and sharp, a single moment of pain at her ankle, and then the venom moved through her quickly, as it sometimes does. Eurydice sank down into the grass. Her companions ran to her. They knelt beside her and called her name. The afternoon, which had been so golden and warm, grew very quiet, and in the underworld, far below the meadow, far below the living earth, a gate opened. Eurydice passed through it. When Orpheus learned what had happened, he could not speak. This may seem like an ordinary thing to say about a man in grief, that he was speechless, that the words would not come. But for Orpheus, it was different. For Orpheus, silence was not his natural state. Music had always flowed out of him the way water flows from a spring, not forced, not performed, simply present, simply natural. Even in sadness, he had always found music. But now there was nothing. His hands fell to his sides. His lyre rested against the wall of his house and gathered dust. He sat in the dark and did not play. Days passed, then weeks. The world continued around him. The rivers moved, the trees grew, the wind wandered as it always had. But Orpheus sat in his silence and felt the shape of something that had no name. Not quite grief. Grief was the thing he knew. This was larger than grief. This was the feeling of a world that no longer quite made sense. He thought of her constantly. He thought of the meadow where they had first met, and the way she had turned toward the sound of his footsteps. He thought of her laughter, which had been bright and quick and entirely her own. He thought of the last time he had seen her face. And then, slowly, the way a river slowly changes direction over many, many years, wearing away one bank and building up another, a thought began to form in his mind. He would go after her. The entrance to the underworld was not a single place. The Greeks believed there were several, certain caves, certain lakes, certain rivers that ran deep into the earth and kept running. Orpheus chose the cave at Tenerus, at the southernmost tip of the Greek mainland, a dark opening in the rock where the stone smelled of cold and depth and something very old. He walked to the entrance in the early morning when the light was still gray and uncertain. He stood at the opening and felt the breath of it, cool, steady air rising from below, carrying the smell of earth and stone and distance. he took his lyre from his shoulder, and he began to play. He played as he walked into the darkness. He played as the light from the world above him faded and was replaced by the pale, gray light of the underworld, a light that has no source, that comes from everywhere and nowhere, that makes shadows fall in all directions at once. He played as the path descended, and wound, and narrowed, and opened again into vast dark spaces that seemed to have no ceiling and no walls. The air down here was different. It was not cold exactly, though it was not warm either. It was simply still, utterly still, in a way that the air above was never still. Above, even in the quietest room, there is always the faint movement of breath, the distant sound of birds, the imperceptible vibration of a living world. Here, there was none of that. The air rested completely, as though it had been resting for a very long time and had forgotten what movement felt like. The path continued downward. The stone beneath his feet was smooth, worn smooth by centuries. By how many feet, Orpheus did not allow himself to think. He played, and his music moved through the still air and spread outward, and the sound came back to him from the distant walls softly changed, softened by distance, like an echo that had traveled a very long way. The souls of the dead were everywhere. They drifted through the gray spaces like smoke, like fog, like the memory of something that had once been warm. They had forgotten, most of them, who they were. They moved through the underworld the way leaves move in still water, slowly, without purpose, without destination. It was not suffering, exactly. It was simply existence, stripped of everything that makes existence feel significant. But when Orpheus played, they stopped. They gathered around him the way they had never gathered in all their gray years in that gray place. They came close, and they were very still, and some of them, some of the oldest ones, who had forgotten almost everything, felt something stir in them that they had not felt in a very long time. Something like warmth, something like memory. They did not speak. They only listened. And Orpheus walked deeper. At the center of the underworld, there was a palace. It was not a warm palace, not in the way of the palaces of the living world. It was made of black stone, smooth and cold, and its gates were iron, and the silence around it was different from the silence in the rest of the underworld, heavier, more deliberate, like the silence of something that is listening. At the throne sat Hades, Lord of the Dead. He was not the skeleton of later nightmares. He was a god, ancient and serious, with a face like dark stone and eyes that had seen every human life from beginning to end. Beside him sat Persephone, his queen, the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, who had been brought here against her will and had learned, slowly and privately, how to find something like peace in this strange and sunless place. They watched Orpheus approach. He walked to the foot of the throne, and he knelt, and he began to play. What he played that night, if night and day can be said to mean anything in a place without sun, is not described in the old stories. There are no words for it, which is perhaps why the storytellers did not try. They only say that it was the most beautiful thing ever played in the underworld, which had heard nothing beautiful before, and that it changed something in the air of that cold, still palace. The Erinyes, the Furies, those terrible and pitiless spirits of vengeance, wept. They did not weep often. They did not weep easily. But they wept then, silently, iron tears running down their ancient faces. Sisyphus, who had been pushing his boulder up his hill for 1,000 years without rest, sat down and was still. Tantalus, who had been reaching for water and fruit just beyond his grasp for just as long, stopped reaching and simply listened. And Persephone, who remembered the world above, the warmth of sun on grass, the smell of spring, the feeling of growing things beneath her feet, pressed her hand to her mouth and looked away. Hades said nothing for a long time, Then he said, "What do you want?" Orpheus did not beg. He did not plead. He spoke quietly and simply, and said only that he had come for his wife, and that the world above was very empty without her, and that he would like, if it was possible, to bring her home. Hades looked at him for a long time with those stone-gray eyes. Then he looked at Persephone. Something passed between them, a conversation without words, the kind that is only possible between two people who have known each other for a very long time in a very quiet place. Persephone turned to Orpheus. "She will follow you," she said. "She will walk behind you, from here to the living world. But you must not look back. Not until you are both fully in the light of the world above. If you look back before that, if you turn to her even once, she will return to us, and she cannot come again." Orpheus agreed. He understood the condition. It was simple. It was clear. He could do this. He rose and turned and began to walk back toward the world of the living. He could hear her. That was the thing about it. He could hear her footsteps behind him. Soft, uncertain footsteps. The footsteps of someone who had been still for too long and was still remembering how to move. He could hear her breathing, quiet and close. He could feel her presence the way you can feel the warmth of a fire even with your back to it. And he did not look. He walked, and he played his lyre as he walked, softly. More softly than he had played anything in his life. Playing almost to himself. Playing the way a person hums quietly when they are trying to stay calm. The path wound upward. The gray light of the underworld began, very gradually, to give way to something else. Not yet sunlight, not yet warmth, but the memory of those things, the faint suggestion of them, like the smell of rain before the storm arrives. He kept walking. He kept playing. He focused on the feeling of the strings beneath his fingers, the familiar smoothness of them, the way they vibrated slightly even after the note had faded, a fine trembling he could feel more than hear. He focused on the sound of his own footsteps, steady and even on the stone. He focused on his breathing. Behind him, her footsteps continued. He thought about the meadow where they had met. He thought about the way the light fell through the trees there in the late afternoon, golden and slanted, full of floating dust that turned briefly bright as it drifted through each shaft of light. He thought about the sound of the other nymphs laughing somewhere in the grass. He thought about the way she had turned when she heard his footsteps, just turned, easily and without hurry, the way a person turns toward something they are not afraid of. He kept walking. He did not look. He walked through the great cavern where the souls of the dead had watched him pass, and they watched him again in silence, and behind him he heard her quiet footsteps, and he kept his eyes forward. He walked through the narrowing passage, where the walls came close and the air changed, becoming warmer, drier, carrying on it the scent of earth and stone and growing things, the smell of roots, the smell of soil, the smell of the world just above the world. He did not look. The passage curved upward, steeply now. He could see light ahead, real light. The pale gold light of early morning, filtering down through the rock from somewhere above. He could feel the warmth of it on his face, tentative at first, then steadier, like the warmth of a fire growing closer. He was almost there. Eurydice's footsteps were still behind him. Quiet. Close. He was almost there. The light was very near now. He could see the opening, the rough circle of morning sky beyond the stone, pale blue and enormous and impossibly beautiful, after the gray of the underworld. A few more steps. Just a few more steps. And then he looked back. Why did he do it? The stories offer different answers, and perhaps all of them are true at once. Some say he looked back out of love, an overwhelming, irrational need to see her face, to confirm with his own eyes what his ears were telling him, that she was there, that she was real, that it was truly her behind him and not some shadow or trick of the underworld. Some say he looked back out of doubt, because the closer he came to the light, the more impossible it seemed that any of this could really be happening, that the god of death had actually agreed to release what death had claimed. Some say he looked back simply because he was human, because human beings, when they are told not to look, look. Because hope and fear become indistinguishable at a certain pitch of feeling, and the only thing that seems to resolve them is to see. He turned. She was there. She was right behind him. Her face was just as he remembered it. The same Eurydice, warm and real, looking at him with eyes that held everything he had hoped to see. But she was still in the shadow. Her foot had not yet crossed into the light. He saw her face change, not with anger, not with blame, only with sorrow, and with something like understanding, as though she had known, somewhere in the part of her that was now more shade than person, that this might happen. She reached out her hand toward him. He reached back. Their fingers did not touch. She was already being drawn backward, gently and without drama, the way the tide draws back from the shore. She did not cry out. She only looked at him, and grew smaller, and the gray of the underworld folded around her like a garment. And she was gone. His hand remained outstretched in the empty air. He tried to go back. Of course he did. He returned to the entrance at Tenerus the very same day, in the late afternoon when the light was long and golden, and he stood at the mouth of the cave and played, and called her name, and waited. But the gate did not open for him this time. The underworld had its own rules, and it had given him what he asked for, and he had not been able to keep it. He sat at the entrance for a long time. Days, perhaps. He played and called and waited, and the gate did not open. Eventually, he walked away. He wandered through the world after that, playing his music in the wild places, the forests, the mountains, the banks of rivers. The trees bent toward him as they always had. The rivers slowed. The stones moved. But the music was different now. It still had beauty. It could not help but have beauty, but there was something in it that had not been there before. A depth, a resonance, something that made those who heard it feel not only beautiful, but also sad, in the way that certain autumn afternoons are sad, or certain songs heard from a great distance, when you can't quite make out the words. He played his grief into the world, and the world received it quietly, as the earth receives rain. The story of Orpheus ends, as all stories must, in the ordinary way. He died, as mortals do. The details differ between tellers. Some say the Maenads, the wild women of the god Dionysus, tore him apart in a frenzy on a Thracian hillside. Some say he died quietly, alone on a riverbank somewhere. But the old storytellers remembered what happened after. His lyre, they say, floated down the river Hebrus into the sea, and all the while it floated, it played. The strings moved in the current, or perhaps on their own, and the music drifted across the water, soft and endlessly sad and completely beautiful. And the shores of the sea received the music without understanding it, the way the sea always receives what the rivers bring, quietly, completely, without comment. The muses gathered what remained of Orpheus and placed him among the stars. If you look up on a clear night, you can find the constellation Lyra, a small, bright pattern of stars. Very simple, just a few points of light arranged in the rough shape of a harp. It is one of the oldest constellations. People have been looking up at it for thousands of years, long before they had a name for it, long before they had the story of Orpheus to attach to it. They looked up and they saw those few quiet stars, and they felt something, some faint, unnameable pull, the way music sometimes moves through you before you have recognized the melody. Perhaps they were hearing something. perhaps on certain nights, when the air is very still and the darkness is very complete, the music finds its way back, traveling not through the air but through something older than air, something that carries sound from one place to another without needing distance or time. They say that if you are lying in the dark, not quite asleep, not quite awake, you can almost hear it. A faint sound, like strings vibrating very softly, like music played at a great distance, like a story that is still being told, somewhere, by someone who has not yet finished, and perhaps never will. The world is full of sounds like that, if you listen for them. Sounds that are almost there. Sounds at the edge of hearing. Let your breathing slow. Let the sounds around you become soft and indistinct. Let the story settle into you, the way warmth settles into cold hands held near a fire, slowly and then all at once. Listen if you like. And rest. That is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Thank you for spending this time with Sleepy Lore. If you'd like to hear more myths, more histories, more stories from the quiet edges of the ancient world, you'll find them here, waiting for you. Good night.